Good morning, everyone. This is Matt Kyle. I'm with Cequence Security. It's the top of the hour, and I'm going to wait just another 30 seconds or so for some additional logins to happen. We should have plenty of time to go through the slides and have a conversation today within the hour that has been allotted. So bear with us for just a few more seconds. Thanks very much. Today's topic is going to be detecting and thwarting automated bot attacks, the imitation game. A little bit about Cequence Security, real quick. Been in business about 5 years, delivering application security products, preventing bots and vulnerability exploits. The founders are from Symantec, and then the leadership is from Palo Alto Networks. The survey was done in late 2019, sponsored by Cequence and F5. There were 209 organizations, and you'll see the breakdown there in terms of the size of the companies. Top 3 industries were financial services, high tech, and manufacturing. Interesting statistics here. The types of bot attacks that make up the 20% of the web traffic. When you think about it, 20% of the web traffic is malicious, probably even higher if you were to expand it to a larger audience. But the types of attacks that are most commonly found in the respondents network are shown there on the right-hand side. I'm not going to dig into all of the statistics in the report. I think that would be kind of boring. And what I think is very interesting is some of the this particular statistic where the report asked the question, how long does it take to find an attack and how long does it take to mitigate it? Automated shopping took the longest, almost 16 days, I think it was 15 days to detect and mitigate. And then denial of inventory was wrapping up the top 5 at about 11 days. When you think about automated shopping, you kind of wonder, well, why is it taking so long for some of these attacks to be detected? And it's the nature of the attack itself, right? These attacks appear to be legitimate transactions. So how are you to distinguish between a bot that is browsing or shopping for a particular product and an end user? But it made more difficult by the fact that traffic might be coming from a residential IP address, so it even looks more legitimate. So there are numerous reasons they might be targeting the APIs as opposed to the web forms, and your security offering might not be looking at the APIs themselves. And then obviously an attacker is going to exercise the basic techniques to try and make sure that his or her behavior is not detected. What are the impacts? So this is some research outside of the EMA research taken from a number of different sources there you see on the lower left-hand corner. When you look at account takeovers, roughly $4 billion in expenses in 2019. There were 679,000 mobile account takeovers. What that means is the account takeover was executed via the mobile application and or the mobile APIs. And in the cost of fraud for each dollar that any of the organizations might have lost in one of these account takeover attacks, it costs nearly $3 to fix it or to address it. And so that's a pretty expensive proposition. Indirect costs, the loss of customer sales, the loss of customer bad experiences, the cost of retaining, of getting a new customer versus retaining an old. These are and then the cost of customer retention. These are all things that are I call indirect because they're harder to measure, they're harder to quantify. But this gives you a sense for the impact that these types of attacks are going to have on an organization. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how the bots will actually mimic users. So I love the title of the report, The Imitation Game, so I'm going to try and carry that theme throughout. So the first thing that we have to understand is an attacker is not just sitting there filling out a web form. That might be an early stage, that might have been something that they would do years ago, but now there is an economy built around malicious attacks. There are tools available that the attackers can use to build and manage and create the attack. Sniper, Sentry MBA and Sniper are two very common tools. And those tools will have predefined attacks. We have some customers who have worked very diligently on getting the predefined attacks out of those tools or making sure that they don't work. There's infrastructure that the attackers will use to distribute and anonymize the attack. These are commonly known as bulletproof proxy vendors or bulletproof proxy networks, where you can go and you can buy. They are marketing themselves with that they have millions of residential IP addresses distributed around the world that will allow you to distribute and anonymize your attack. So, for example, if I'm going to attack a MasterCard here in the United States, as an attacker, I'm going to want to use IP addresses that are here in the United States. If I'm going to attack a company in EMEA, then I'm going to distribute my attack throughout Europe. So they are very sophisticated tools. Credentials, every week it seems that there is a new batch of credentials that is stolen and published. So there is a readily available and always being refreshed set of credentials that the attackers can load into the tools and distribute across the infrastructure. And then obviously the attackers are going to execute, or change, I should say, their behavior as they are met with resistance or as a mechanism to hide their attack. They might launch a very simple high volume attack as a diversion to a more sophisticated and slower or less visible attack where they're actually getting to the target. All right, so the imitation technique number one is targeting the APIs. You know, the explosion in APIs has been a significant benefit to developers and to organizations as they try to move towards an agile development process and become more competitive. It's also benefiting attackers. Those APIs are often published on the web. They're published on your website in order to facilitate partnerships. They're published on the resource programmableweb.com or perhaps GitHub, easily found by both malicious users and legitimate users. So the attackers will take these APIs, deconstruct how they work, do some testing to see what kinds of responses they get back when they use the API. They'll create an attack then that will take advantage of the exposure of the API, and they'll launch an automated attack against that API instead of, say, launching an attack against a web form. It's much easier to use the API than to script a web form fill for a registration page or a login page, for example. And as I mentioned, the attack execution is done using the different attack components that I had talked about earlier: the credentials, the infrastructure, and the tools. Now, the interesting thing that APIs bring to the table now is that I can now use those APIs to go directly to the user registration database. And, instead of having to go through a web form to an app server to the back-end database, I'm going directly to that target. So the APIs are difficult to defend for a number of different reasons. They're stateless in nature. So anything that collects state, any type of security device that has to collect state will have difficulty in protecting an API. They include typically the entire transaction. So instead of the back and forth that you might get from filling in a web form or something like that, the entire transaction is sent along in the API. And then there's finally, this is an obvious one, but there's no client or agent. And in many cases, the way that you are protecting your public-facing web applications is using a JavaScript client or a mobile SDK. So that, again, makes it difficult, if not impossible, to protect the APIs. Another way that the attackers will use an imitation technique is large-scale distribution. This is an example of an attack that one of our customers experienced. The big thing that they did is down here at the bottom, where they distributed the attack across 1.4 million IP addresses. They distributed 1.4 million login requests across 56,000 residential IP addresses globally. The organizations that the IP addresses belong to were located in Vietnam, Canada, France, and the United States. And so this, to the company, appeared to be fairly legitimate traffic. The things that were indicators that it was an attack was the low level of sophistication. They didn't really try and rotate the user identity or the browser identity, and they were logging in at odd times. And the credentials that they used were old. This was a financial services organization that does not allow you to use your email as your user ID. And so that was a telling sign of the detection. So, I already talked a little bit about the bulletproof proxies. This was a perfect example of how bulletproof proxy networks come into play. They're using the large-scale distribution. And the thing that is important to understand here is, again, the organization is looking at the traffic, and they are seeing it come from what appear to be residential IP addresses. So the decision to allow it or to block it becomes, at times, a difficult decision. When you bring in the low level of sophistication and the credential use, the decision to block is made easier. Here's another example. In this particular case, the attacker gave himself away because they used an obsolete version of HTTP, which might have been a diversionary tactic. But the thing that was very interesting in this particular attack was the level of sophistication around the user agent or the device. They rotated it and across many thousands of user agents, and they also were spoofing the Chrome mobile browser. the distribution of IP addresses, the distribution of the attack, I should say, was across a smaller number of IP addresses, but again, here too, they were global in nature. OVH, DigitalOcean, they are all European-based, and then Amazon obviously is global. When we look at the task of scraping, it's not. Let's be honest. It is not an imitation technique per se. The challenge with scraping, and one of the reasons why it might have taken so long to detect, if you think back to the earlier slide, it was the second or third longest to detect and mitigate. It is because it looks like it's a legitimate user. Again, scraping is done typically on the initial HTTP GET, so you're viewing something, and so that can be done on a web form, that can be done against an API, that can be done in a number of different forms. So you're looking at that traffic. The attackers, what they will do is they will use the automated techniques to mimic a user. So they are indeed imitating a user, but they're doing it to scrape instead of to browse or to buy. And then they're using that to post to their own website to gain a competitive advantage or to steal sales. We have a customer, it's a large retail customer in Europe, that the scraping is so blatant, and it's a competitor that's scraping. The scraping is so blatant that competitors actually posting pictures with the scraped target watermark in the pictures itself, and so that's how blatant it can get in some cases. When we think about the processes here, it appears to be a legitimate traffic, as I mentioned, and the reason why one of the big reasons why it's difficult to detect is agent-based offerings will often miss the attacks or have false positives or inconsistent results because the attack execution is done on the get. Right, you're copying. You view a web page image or web page content. You copy, and then that attack is effectively executed. When we think about an agent-based approach to protecting against scraping, the telemetry needs to be collected, and that telemetry is collected typically on the post. They're bringing back that information to a server or to a resource, and so the attack is typically missed or detected inconsistently. So let's talk a little bit about Cequence security. We have what we call an application security platform. We take an AI-driven approach to detect and prevent vulnerability exploits, as well as automated malicious attacks against your API-based applications or your APIs themselves, as well as web-based applications. By doing that, we are also protecting the mobile applications. When you think about a mobile application, typically they are API driven. So anything that you are doing on your device or your mobile device is executed more commonly than not through an API. The core of the product is CQAI. It's our secret sauce, if you will. I'll get into the details around it in just a bit. We then leverage the CQAI findings in both the bot defense and app firewall components. The REST-based APIs allow us to import threat research or other data to enhance our findings. And those same REST-based APIs allow us to export the findings to a SIM or to a forensic tool, perhaps to your firewall for enforcement, or some other mechanism, some other security element within your infrastructure. So it's a very open, anti-black box approach to security. And then finally, as I mentioned, we don't rely on JavaScript or SDK as a means of collecting the telemetry necessary to determine if the traffic is legitimate or malicious. And I'm going to dig into that right now. So, the first thing that we do is once we're deployed, is we will do a mapping of all of your web and API-based applications, giving you a sitemap here on the right-hand side, if you will, that allow you to do a couple of things. It gives you visibility, and then it allows you to tag those URIs for policy-based decision-making. So you'll see a little bit of that in just a moment, but it allows you to tag those APIs and those URIs for use in security policies throughout the product, as well as filtering and other visual applications. It's a unified dashboard that holistically looks at both application firewall and bot defense, and we don't really care where the applications are deployed. Again, because there's no SDK or JavaScript required, when applications are deployed by your development team, we can automatically begin protecting them. That's one advantage. And then the other advantage is that there is no QA impact or new release impact on the development team. Their focus, your development team is going to be focused on bringing new applications to market as quickly as possible. So, this is the secret sauce. It's C2AI. There are multiple techniques that we use to uncover the malicious intent. There's 160 or so predefined rules that are used to separate malicious from legitimate intent. Those rules are customizable, so they can be tailored for a particular organization, tailored for a particular attack pattern or attack behavior. And we're continually using what we learn from our organization, from our customers, to enhance and improve those machine learning policies. That's obvious. Sometimes that's an obvious statement because it is AI-based, but it's important to understand that the purpose is for retooling. So we'll look at the application profiling, some of the basic elements there on the very left-hand side, stolen credentials, tools. The more advanced analysis begins in the middle, where we're looking at statistical analysis and some of the clustering. And then as we look more deeply into the intent, we're going to give you a risk score looking at automation indicators and then using the customizable rules to ultimately deliver a behavioral fingerprint. And the value of that behavioral fingerprint is that it's going to track the attacker regardless of the behaviors or the mechanisms by which they use to evade detection. So we'll be able to see that the attacker was spoofing an older version of Chrome and then switch to a more sophisticated user rotation. So there is there's the ability, if you will, to ensure that they don't evade detection as they retool. The drilling down into a little bit more into the ways in which we qualify the traffic is, as we looked at earlier, attackers have 4 elements that they use in the attacks. We've embedded those 4 elements into the product itself so we can look and understand the tools, the infrastructure, the credentials, and the behaviors so that you can use that information and understand that exactly where the attack is coming from and what they're emphasizing within the product. Some of the rules customization capabilities, we can do application-specific rules that are based on the HTTP payload, on the actual behavioral fingerprint, time of day, geo-fencing. So you have a fair amount of flexibility in terms of the types of rules that you can implement. And you can implement these rules, I should say, to be detection only, and just monitor mode, or you can use them in a mitigation effort. So it's really up to you. The application firewall element uses Lua and mod security scripting, 2 very common tools in the application firewall world. And we do, like most firewalls, app firewalls, address the OAuth top 10 as well as PCI 6.6. One of the unique characteristics that we have is a fairly broad set of threat remediation options. So we can block, we can rate limit, do a header insertion, and one of the cooler responses is deception. So we can deploy a honeypot within your organization that allows you to create a customized response. So you might think, well, why do I want to respond to an attacker? It allows you to put some guardrails around the attack. So one of our customers is sending responses back to the attackers that indicate they are having some level of success. The responses are actually translated into 14 different languages because that's part of the company policy. So it makes it appear as the attacker is having some success, and they tend not to retool. And so that gives the customer that ability to kind of control what's happening. That's just one example of how deception might be used in your response mechanisms. Getting close to wrapping up now. We're going to delve into deployment options and a couple of customer examples. So it is, the product is 100% software based, so no physical devices are required. We don't ship any physical devices. Obviously, if you're deploying in your data center, you're going to put it on either a virtual machine or a physical device. It can also be deployed in any of the cloud environments. And in those scenarios, it is customer managed, so you manage the installation and all of the policies, all of the data. There is an option that allows us to be your partner, if you will, where we are viewing your data and monitoring in a threat monitoring mode, so we can monitor the activity and help you make decisions based on whether that traffic is malicious or not and what policies to implement. Again, that is an option. If you don't choose to go down that route, then we will train your team to be threat hunters and policy responders. We also have recently rolled out a SaaS offering. So the SaaS offering is allows us to take some of the burden off of you that is required to deploy and manage the infrastructure, the security infrastructure. Here again, we much like the public cloud vendors, we practice a shared responsibility model where we are managing the infrastructure. You are managing your policies, your data, access to that data, and so on. Much like you would use Salesforce.com, where Salesforce is managing the back end and you are managing all the data. That's a similar approach that we take for the SaaS offering. So pretty flexible deployment options for you to fit your application architecture requirements. Going back to the report itself, so the EMA asked the customers, the respondents, I should say, about the top benefits that they received from mitigating bots. 23% said that they reduced fraud costs. 19% saw a lowered web infrastructure, and then the end user experience was improved across 15%. Now, if you translate that into, they also then asked, what was the dollar figure associated with the first two, and 40% said that they saw anywhere between $100 to $500,000 reduction in costs, while 26% saw as much as $1 million, anywhere between $500K to $1 million in reduction. So that's a significant return on investment for this type of offering. Going to touch on a few customer examples. This particular customer, large retailer, they have a very lucrative loyalty points program, and they were struggling to stop account takeovers that resulted in loyalty points theft that could be immediately translated into product. So they were experiencing revenue losses, because the end customer would ask for a refund because they didn't make that purchase. They were also experiencing, obviously, significant user frustration. They implemented the Cequence bot defense and were able to save, over the course of a year, roughly $1.7 million. The attackers were targeting a combination of web and mobile login endpoints. The login traffic that they were seeing was roughly 90% at one time was malicious. And then as I mentioned, the loyalty points fraud and customer dissatisfaction were the two pain points that the customer had. And then you can scan through the additional benefits achieved by deploying the Cequence bot defense. In this particular case, it too was an account takeover, this is a dating application. The company is Zoosk, Z-O-O-S-K. So it's a relationship site, or a relationship application, I should say, primarily a mobile application. And so the attackers deconstructed the mobile application and used the 20-odd or the 30 or so login endpoints that they have in the mobile application to try and execute account takeovers. In the early phases where we were not deployed, the account takeovers that would often result in romance scams, and the average loss in a romance scam is $12,000. Not to mention the emotional impact on a user who has just gave a stranger $12,000 and lost both the relationship and the money. So significant benefit is, we're stopping these account takeovers and virtually have eliminated romance scams associated with account takeovers. And then the final attack was a customer example. This is a very large financial services customer. We've been protecting all of their public-facing login and registration applications for now going on 4 years. The thing that won us the business was our ability to detect the attacks coming across a mobile application, the mobile APIs, targeting the logins. If the attacker was successful, they would attempt to transfer funds across the OFX API. The OFX API is the official financial services funds transfer protocol. So they would try and transfer, if they were able to achieve account takeover my account, they would then try and transfer my funds into their own temporary account as a means of stealing that money. So we were able to detect and block that traffic. You see some of the statistics here. 50 to 90% of the login traffic was automated. They had 20 or so mobile endpoints in this particular scenario. It's expanded dramatically over the years, but for this particular use case, they were looking at 20. And then the result of the attack was fraud. They look at it as financial fraud, and obviously customer dissatisfaction. So we were able to stop those attacks from occurring. So that wraps up the deck. We've got a few minutes. Let's see if there's some questions coming across. Yes, okay. So one of the questions that we often get is, can I expand on how the product is licensed? The licensing is done based on the number of transactions that we analyze in your network. So you're not going to send all of your web traffic to Cequence. You're going to send a select number of public-facing applications, typically all of your login endpoints, perhaps your registration endpoints. If you're a retailer, you're going to maybe send some of the shopping cart endpoints. So depending on what industry you're in, you're going to selectively send that traffic to the Cequence cluster. And then it's licensed based on the number of transactions we see and analyze. It's banded. So it starts at roughly 1 million transactions per day and then goes up to 1 billion. That sounds like a lot, but we actually have quite a few customers that are in the billion transactions per day category. So that gives you a sense for the licensing. And then the other option that you want to consider is whether you want to subscribe to the threat monitoring service. In that scenario, you grant us VPN access to the dashboard with limited control and limited role-based administration, if you will. So we can view the data alongside your team and analyze it and provide help. There is a licensed Slack channel that is established between the customer, the customer, and Cequence in order to, maintain support and deliver updates accordingly. Question came in, is the solution on-prem or cloud-based? It can be either or. So it's a software-based offering. It's actually a container. It's delivered as a container, and it expands into a number of different modules. It's Linux-based, so we have a mix of customer deployment scenarios. The large financial services customer I mentioned is a private data center, so on-premises. And then one of the larger retailers that we have is using the SaaS offering. So it can be deployed in your data center, in AWS or Google or Azure, or it can be deployed as a SaaS offering. The product, so the next question that came in is the product deployed in inline mode. Again, that's a choice. There is tap mode that we have deployed in some scenarios where we take the traffic off of your switch or your load balancer, and then we will send the findings to your firewall or to your SIM for analysis or enforcement. Or alternatively, there is an agent that goes in line. It's a lightweight agent that looks at traffic and sends the traffic to CQAI, the engine. CQAI, the analytics engine, is out of band, and to ensure that there is no latency injected into the traffic stream. In that scenario, you can use it in visibility only mode, or you can use it as an enforcement mode. Obviously, if we're enforcing, there has to be an inline component. That's the lightweight agent I mentioned just a few seconds ago. The follow-on question is, what is the performance degradation? There is little to no performance degradation, if you will. The only there may be a minor impact to latency, and that is going to be very dependent upon your networking environment, and so it's very difficult to assign a number to that. But nearly all of our customers are using it in inline mode, including the financial services customers. And so who are typically very sensitive to latency, regardless of the type of network traffic. Great questions, though. The other question that we get is who do we compete with, and what are some of the key benefits that we have over our competitors. We compete with Shape Distill Networks, which is now part of Imperva, as well as Perimeter X, as well as the CDN vendors, Bot Manager from Akamai, and so on. All of them use JavaScript injected into your web pages and/or an SDK on your mobile device. That has a couple of impacts. It has a development impact. It has a QA impact, meaning you have to keep up with their cycles and kind of weave their cycles into your cycles. JavaScript has a page load impact. It slows your page load time. So if you're investing heavily into CDN to optimize your page loads, and now you're using JavaScript, you're taking away some of that investment. And as I mentioned several times throughout the presentation, the telemetry collected it works pretty well for account takeovers and fake account creation, but it fails to catch APIs because you can't instrument the APIs. You're forced to redirect the request to a web page where a cookie is assigned, and that oftentimes doesn't work for all scenarios. So there are several key differences. Again, we do not use any agents injected into the application or the mobile application itself. We're relying on the ML-based approach to inspect and determine malicious intent. And I'm going to wait just another minute. We have about 8 or 9 more minutes. Again, I apologize for having myself on mute this morning, but I think we were able to get through. I'm going to put up the last slide here. There are a couple of different resources. If you're interested in more, check out the website. We do have a 30-day free trial for the product that you can see on the website itself. Also can follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up. There are no more questions. Thank you very much for your time today, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.